I have one just that's relating to your forthcoming book, and we can do a follow up conversation on it. But is there a key insight from that book that you feel is most urgent to today's audience in this conversation with respect to the noosphere or any other of human energy's principles around the techno-social dilemma, human energy as a concept, and an integrative worldview or a third story?
Yeah, thanks. I think the main one also for this audience, and it grows out of my own kind of work here, is that we don't want to get tied to one metaphor for the planetary without even knowing it. I mean, so the kind of, I would say the hope in my book is that excavating and bringing to light the metaphorical foundations for a lot of these concepts will give us kind of a new space for conversation around like what different languages for the planetary, what affordances they have, what limitations each has. And the three, at least, that I've identified, and this grows out of work at Human Energy as well as then a lot of work at the Berggruen, but work that I did with Clément Vidal and in conversation with Michael Parham-Monica, with a lot of people on the call, is the idea that that there really is a difference in thinking about our planetary being or identity in terms of as a body. There's a difference in thinking about it as a sphere. There's a difference in thinking about it as a force, and that these differences kind of map onto the body, maps on especially to Gaia theory, but also the human superorganism discourse that we mentioned in Teilhard is one aspect of it. It maps onto the noosphere and and the idea of the spheres, and then the Anthropocene idea of forces. And what I noticed moving among these three different or science-rooted visions of the human is that it tends to be that people that are drawn to one get a little bit defensive and territorial in relationship to the others, or they just get so pulled into one that we don't necessarily see the others. So like Gaia theory folks may not be thinking about the noosphere, at all, or noosphere folks may be thinking less about the Anthropocene, and Anthropocene folks may only see the noosphere as a predecessor concept, but not recognize it as a. And so I think, like, for me, it's actually a conversation between all three of these and more that is really valuable, and I would say that's the kind of insight I would try to push, is like have these three communities start talking to each other and meet each other as peers rather than in a posture of we have the right concept and then implicitly the right metaphor, and then we have to see how do we kind of fit the others as subordinate concepts and discourses, and then the kind of deeper the deeper opportunity there too is that the different metaphors will also speak to different cultural traditions at different moments, not only in an abstract way, but that'll allow us to bring in, there's a whole discourse in Taoist thought around force that's really interesting and kind of different from how the Anthropocene conceptualizes force. And there's a whole, the way the body might appear in one tradition might be very different from how the body, but that's an opening for so many interesting discussions around the planetary and the noosphere.
Beautiful.
So I'll
yeah, thank you for that. And P here, do you know anything about 0 point energy physics? I don't know if so, but he has a question between their relationship with the noosphere.
would it be possible to? I personally don't know, but I would love if behind that question there's knowledge and about 0 point energy physics. It would be great if Professor J. Paul is happy to share that, whether in the chat or in person.
Yeah, and feel free to ask your question. I have another one that I can queue up in the meantime. This is a nice general question that I come back to over and over again to kind of bring the concept of the noosphere back to the individual. If there was a practice or habit that you believe could strengthen the health of the noosphere today, as you understand it, either at the individual or collective level, what would it be?
Yeah, I mean, a few different things come to mind. One is, but maybe one is an influence from Robert Wright, who's connected also to Human Energy as a speaker at the M2 2023 conference. But the big concept, I mean, not the concept he's coined, but that he's really kind of put forward is this idea of cognitive empathy, of the idea of essentially kind of perspective taking, of trying to put oneself, like you really use our theory of mind, like in a very active and conscious way, both on an individual level, of course, like try to put oneself into another person's shoes to see where they're coming from, which doesn't even necessarily always mean feeling what they're feeling, but at least start with the perspective. And to be able to also do that on a, and this is what I would emphasize too, especially to be able for us to do this at a multi-scale level. So, in international relations, try to perspective take from another nation's point of view, because we, of course, have our national identities, our national interests. And the same can be said. There's a great concept I heard about, and I don't remember again the theologian who came up with it, of holy envy in between religious traditions, of trying to also like put oneself in the position of a different religious tradition and think about like what are the new affordances that open up, what are the potentialities, and how can, so I would actually say kind of fostering a practice of cognitive empathy on multiple scales is one really good place to start. What I would maybe add to that is if you can use that cognitive empathy as then a basis for going beyond kind of conceptual perspective taking and actually pulling ourselves to have deeper relationships with the sorts of narratives that other people inhabit, and put forward and be able to take time to step out of our own narratives and try to really experience the sort of aesthetics and again in this multi-scale fashion, like what happens if you really do spend some time. You don't have to necessarily become like kind of completely practicing Taoist, but what happens if we spend a good amount of time reading and thinking about Taoism? That's not the tradition that we're raised in, and what possibilities emerge out of that. So yeah, I would say that that's sort of my yeah would be my emphasis of cognitive empathy, building towards a richer kind of guided empathy first, which is not me saying that I practice this practice well or as often as I should. It's just me saying that when I do, or when I hear about it, it definitely strikes a chord, and it feels like such a kind of a potential local but multi-scalar thing that feels like it can completely ricochet or resonate outward to a lot of different aspects of our lives, and allow us to inhabit that noospherical space a little bit more often.
Beautiful. And yeah, it's so much easier to envision than to practice. So not holding it against you. And I had this other question that we had, seems to be able to go into a little bit more of the details of how we might develop that, in the sense of the Noosphere concept suggests a fusion of affect, reason, and technology. And which of these dimensions do you feel is most fragile or critical right now? And in that way, like, where are we strong in our ability to think in this empathetic way, and where are we not, with respect to the Noosphere being this fusion of these different dimensions?
Yeah. I mean, in a way, to build off. I mean, I'm glad you threw connected this question, Devin, to this preceding discussion. Is that it's almost, I would say, technology for me at least doesn't actually feel like where we're fragile right now. Like the technosphere seems very robust, and the infosphere seems like it's being energized very powerfully as well. It does feel, and even reason in a way, like reason as opposed to nous, even reason as a kind of the ability to think through the logical, to think through logical chains and find ways to apply them to practical reality. This is maybe just one unfair definition of at least what I'm associating with reason. It's a beautiful and important, quality, but I would say like we're strong there as well. Overall, it's really almost the affectual reason, the relationship between those two things, where I think, we sometimes, what is it? Who is it that said that like reason is the slave of the passions? Is it David Hume? But like where we don't know we maybe don't have quite the affectual, and even the sort of governance structures that allow us to see where our affects and our less reasonable parts of ourselves take us. Um, both like the negative side of our affects, but also sort of this aesthetic dimension of our affects we sometimes don't invest in, quite as much. And it's something you see like the noosphere is actually fairly easy to pull into also a utopian a techno-utopian vision that technology is gonna, and in a way I think that's kind of where at the like sort of, I don't want to say weakest moments, Vernadsky and Teilhard fell into, I think, some of this techno-utopian aspects of noospheric thought. And so it's like it's affect really probably where I would say there's a sophisticated relationship with affect that we're still developing. And the example I would give in a way is like, I mean, I feel this myself. It's definitely something we feel with parenting is, even managing screen time and managing our own, like this is an intimate kind of screen time and a conversational one. But like, while I'm having this conversation, I have my phone nearby just in case. And I'm like constantly trying to like resist the temptation of like picking up my phone and just looking at it. I don't know what I want from my phone. Like, it's not that like, it's not that I'm expecting a really important call and I'm obviously kind of committed, but my attention is now so like conditioned to relate to my phone, and that's not a reason dimension. That's the part of me that's somewhat unreasonable, but it's also the part of me where I haven't learned to kind of govern this new affect that loop that emerges between like my technology and myself. And I think this is also something that we're just kind of learning to get to also Monica's time development point. Even the time development of a human being, like we're starting to think about like, like this is Jonathan Haitzberg. How much of this kind of relationship do we just sort of give over to young children, and at what point, and how do we moderate that and all of that? And so there's so affect, I think there's a lot there that's that's both, positives that we're not taking advantage of when we think in very cold reason ways, and negatives where we're not, as not even aware, but like where we, where we can't enter into thoughtful relationship with our own affects very easily.
Beautiful.
So anyway,
Thank you. And we're rounding out our hour here, and I got two more questions for you, both fairly simple ones, but this one I loved and wanted to throw your way. If you could ask Teilhard or Vernadsky one question about the noosphere, or really anything in general, what would you ask them? Or maybe challenge them?
No, it's a good question. I mean, the way one of the phrases that came to mind when I was thinking about this idea of Vernadsky as the quote unquote prophet of the technosphere and Teilhard as the prophet of the infosphere is that, they were almost like more right than they knew. Like the infosphere has actually developed, like communicational technologies have like, developed probably beyond anything Teilhard would have expected to happen so quickly. And for Vernadsky, the sheer sort of presence of human technology and its effect on the more than human world has also accelerated probably beyond what he might have imagined. You got to think, right? When they were born in a world of like 2 billion people, even that just sheer. And then I think, when they passed, the world was, still like 3 billion people in the world. Like it was just such a different world that they were facing. And obviously they had also seen both world wars. So what I would ask in a way is like, kind of, you both were like more right than you knew, but the like the way I've put this before is like, but the structure of experience associated with it is so, often to me at least, it has elements of some of the things that you put emphasis on, but it's also so like different from the vision one might have reading your work and imagining like, if you're right about the technical side, what will it be like to live in that world? And I'd be really curious to get their thoughts which isn't, they operated from their time horizon. They had their limitations. I'm sure someone watching our talk 100 years from now, or whatever, would also like think, oh, like they were right about certain things more than they knew, and but then the predictions were, but like I don't want to be ungenerous there. It'd be more like the curiosity of like, now that you kind of shaped this concept, and now that you kind of see this proliferation of spheres and some of the disharmonies that have emerged, like I would be just really curious, like, you know, if you stepped back and thought like what did we miss? Like what did you miss, but also what did we miss collectively as we developed the internet? That right now doesn't make it feel yet quite like a noosphere, even though it has no spherical pockets and places we step into the noosphere. That I would really love to kind of to hear.
Wonderful. And we're rounding out our hour here, but want to end on some optimism. And with respect to this complex times that we find ourselves in, what gives you hope in humanity's ability to navigate these complexities and this form of the noosphere, infosphere, technosphere complex that we find ourselves in? Where do you find hope and inspiration in that vision?
Yeah. I mean, definitely in communities like this one, definitely in the fact that these concepts are out there, more people are thinking about them, more people are talking about them, and that and that we're starting to kind of think about and provide spaces for creating dialogue between the kind of more traditional ways the concept of planetarity may have been put forward, with this kind of idea that it's just sort of happening and going to happen. But now we're like, exhibit one in a positive sense would be very much the framing of the Noosphere and Global South Conference, and Devin, like the sensitivity to the kind of aesthetics and how do we use these spaces in ways that foster this kind of dialogue. I definitely kind of see a lot of hope there, and I'm pushed and challenged when I enter these spaces, and and then I find hope in those in those moments, like I mentioned. I mean, it's a complicated place to see hope, but even in like thinking about the Noosphere's relationship to Gorbachev, at that the concept does have the capacity to enter into people's thoughts and shape major decisions. We can have then a conversation over whether it shaped it in a purely positive way, but the fact that these concepts have that possibility is really, I think, enlivening for people who are engaged in dialogue around the concepts. And and then like it's in a small but major example. There's a lot of global momentum now in thinking even about like what I alluded to with like managing the challenge of our more screen-filled world for childhood development. Like Jonathan Haidt's work is now leading to a lot of conversations around in a lot of different governmental and civic bodies all around the world that are starting to kind of think about like how do we create a healthy relationship to this amazing technology that can pull us in. And that's actually very hopeful to see that there are also tipping points, social tipping points, where ideas and analyses kind of can become policy and can help create a more supportive context in all of this change.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, this has been a wonderful hour. I feel like we could continue to talk for hours and hours, and and good to see the developments in the chat. I've linked Boris's name here if anyone wants to send him more questions or follow up, but we'll close out here. Boris, thank you so much for helping us carve out our little corner of the noosphere and trying to find some harmony to tune and become planetary musicians in our own way. Really appreciate everything you have to offer and looking forward to more conversations in the future.
Thank you so much, Devin, and thank you so much for everyone else who's both come on stage and been in the audience. It's been really great.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. We'll close up here.
Thank you.
Take care.